Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today it is the much requested setup of my gouache palette. If you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Irit. I'm an intuitive artist based in Austria in Europe, and on my channel I share my artsy adventures. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down so that I know what you like to see. Leave me a comment. Tell me if you paint with gouache. What is your favorite brand? And which palette you're using. I would love to know, and also other viewers would love to know, because I'm just one person and I just have my own opinion. And of course, I would love for you to subscribe. Before I get into the colors, let's talk about this palette. This is a Mello palette. It is quite big. It's a little bit too big for me. I feel it takes a lot of space on my desk. That's probably the one disadvantage that I feel, because otherwise I think it's a great option. The limitations besides the size are with any of this type of palette where you squeeze out tube paint into pans. You can't move them around once they are there. So if you want to switch things up, you have to start scraping, and then you're wasting paint. The thing is that with gouache, most people use gouache freshly squeezed out of the tube. And I do think that that is the best way to use gouache. Based on my experience with them, just the way that the paint is formulated, if you leave it in your palette for a long time, unlike watercolor that is made for that, gouache paint will most likely crumble and fall out of your palette. You can get around this, which is what I am doing, because personally, I don't love having to squeeze out paint. I like to have a large selection of colors, and I don't know when I'll be painting, how I'll be painting, and so I want something I can close and put away when I'm not interested, and then when I have the time and mental capacity for painting, that I can just open it and it's ready to go. And that is why I chose this palette. It has a pretty good tight closure, so I think most of the humidity stays in here, and I make sure to spray this before I'm closing it, when I'm using it, so most of the time you can see the condition of the paint. There is a little bit of extra water, but you can also still see, you can see what happens to the paint. Now this is perfectly usable, but it just behaves a little differently than watercolors. So I'm just giving you my full experience, pros and cons, and you can make your own informed decisions. Personally, for me, this way works, and it has allowed me to paint more with gouache, which I'm really enjoying. I usually combine it with other media, with my watercolors, with my pastels. That's just me. But I definitely am finding myself reaching for this gouache palette when I'm painting with my watercolors, which didn't happen in the past before I had a really nice arrangement. Now, let's talk about the colors. Before I set this up, this is important. You want to make sure you know which color to set up. I was inspired by an artist on Instagram. She also has a really fun gouache painting course on Domestika. I will put her name on the screen because for the life of me I can't remember, but she is lovely. Her art is fantastic. You will see if you go and check her out on Instagram. Super colorful, my kind of artwork. In that course on Domestika, which I took, she has a very, very similar setup. That is why I use this setup the way that you see it. And for me, it works really well. My brain loves to work in color. And so having like my warm colors here, yellows, reds, then all of my pinks, violets, blues, and then greens, and at the end here I have a couple of earth tones. And now I will tell you which colors I chose and if I like them and if I am using them. So this is my palette swatched. Let's start. So we have here the Daniel Smith Buff Titanium. My experience so far with the Daniel Smith paint, I haven't had it for a long time because they are new to the range, is lovely, and I've actually switched out. I had a watercolor Buff Titanium in my palette, in my watercolor palette, and I switched it with the gouache version from Daniel Smith because I feel it gives me more, my brain just says pow. It just gives me more. Because when I use buff titanium, I really like it for mudding up colors and adding opacity. And I feel like the gouache does it better than the watercolors. I love Naples Yellow, and I decided to include two versions in my palette, both from Winsor Newton. So I just wanted to show you, I don't think you need both unless you really, really love this color. With colors that I love, I like to have options, as you can see like here, for example. I don't think you need all of these three, but if you really, really love teals and mints, then it's just nice to have options. So I feel the same way about Naples Yellow, and this one is the Naples Yellow and this one is the Naples Yellow Deep. Probably you can get something like this if you add a little bit of white or buff titanium to this one. Here I have my yellows. I have Holbein Lemon, which lemon yellow is a color everyone says you should have it because it's so versatile. I agree. I took it out of my watercolor palette years ago because I never used it, and I thought maybe with gouache I would feel differently, and I do use it occasionally, so we'll see, time will tell. And then as kind of my primary go-to yellow, I'm using the Daniel Smith Hansa Yellow Medium. It is a great basic color to have. Really happy with it, use it a lot. Now, actually, this is the area that surprised me because these are not colors that I have in my watercolor palette. And I find myself reaching for the gouache palette just so I can use them because somehow in recent artwork, they really seem to I want them and I enjoy them. So I have here Schmincke Cadmium Yellow Deep. Despite the name, I would call this an orange. And you can see it here in the palette next to the yellows. I think it's an orange. It's a nice one. I have had this color for a really long time, and it is still usable. So that really tells me that the Schmincke gouache paints, I have a few of them for, I think now, 7 years. And I also have some old Holbein pans that I had to throw away because they were stone hard and completely unusable. Don't come for me in the comments. I tried, there was just no way of using them. And the Schmincke seemed to really last. Trust Schmincke to formulate something to perfection. Their colors are just not as good as Holbein's and Winsor Newton, but the formulation is great. So that's my orange of choice. I don't use a lot of oranges. I am enjoying this one and I'm surprised by it as much as you are, possibly. And then another color that I'm loving and using a lot, and also using it with my watercolors, is Holbein's Vermilion. Classic vermilion, just like a very yellowy red. Really love it, use it a lot. Then this is more of a convenience color, which I enjoy having these colors in my palette, and I think with gouache, I think they are even more usable than with watercolors. I have a few different pastel watercolors. I never seem to really enjoy them, but with gouache, I am enjoying these kinds of colors more that are very pale. And this is a good example. So pale coral, really nice color. And then this one I recently added to my palette, and this is the Winsor Newton Permanent Rose. I absolutely love this color in oils. I don't use it as much in gouache, but you can see this is kind of a regular, you know, type of quinacridone rose, permanent rose. If you like this color, then this is a good version. I personally prefer those really fluorescent pinks, and so this one is a little bit lonely in my palette, but I know that this is a great color for a lot of people. So here are my three glorious stars. We have Holbein Opera, Winsor Newton Opera Rose, and Holbein Rose. If I had to pick one, I would probably go with this one or this one. This you can see is a little bit warmer. It's kind of that classic opera. I still like it, but these are just a bit more bluish, a bit more my colors. They're very similar. Somehow I find the differences and I use them both. Then here we have, what are you? I think this is Daniel Smith Quinacridone Magenta. So this is another like good basic color to have. I don't know if I use it a lot because I just usually tend to go with these, but I do use it occasionally. Then we have another like POW color. This is Winsor Newton Brilliant Violet. This is a color that I used to have in my watercolor palettes when I started my watercolor journey, and I used this a lot. But then I kind of stopped using it. I am enjoying it in my gouache palette, but it's not a color I use like all the time. If you want maximum versatility in your palette, if you're on a budget, then don't spend your money on these kinds of colors. Buy the super saturated ones and then mix them with white. That would give you a range of colors. So these kinds of colors, they're great to have as convenience colors, but you can mix your own and save some money and space. So this is Winsor Newton Brilliant Purple. This is again a color that is very popular. I am using it a little bit, definitely more than I use this in watercolors. In watercolors, I don't like this color. It's kind of that dioxazine violet purple color. Very popular with a lot of people. Definitely versatile. Just not my favorite color, but if you add a lot of white to it, then I like it. Then we have Daniel Smith Wisteria. This is a convenience color. You can see it's kind of like a purpley color with a lot of white. I really like it. I really enjoy it in gouache. In watercolors, I'm not a fan. I tend to prefer just using Cobalt Violet, but in gouache, this is really fun. And the formulation of the Daniel Smith gouache is beautiful. Here I have a color by Holbein. This is called Myosotis. Sounds like some sort of inflammation. Blue. And this is okay, but I wish it were closer to lavender, and I might just get the perfect lavender, maybe the Daniel Smith version, just because I love their lavender. Yeah, I love having this kind of color. I use it in watercolor all the time, but this one is not that perfect lavender shade. It's just not purplish enough for my personal taste. But you don't need lavender. You can just take ultramarine and add a lot of white to it, which is what I do. So this is, I would probably say, a redundant color. This is the Winsor Newton Ultramarine. I love ultramarine blue. That's my go-to blue. And this one is lovely. Then we have the Winsor Newton Indigo, which I'm not a huge fan of. I really love the Schmincke watercolor Indigo, which is more, I would say, reminds me more of an Indanthrone blue. This one is just a little bit too yellow biased for me. I'm not in love with it. I did pick up the Schmincke Indigo blue to try it because I was hoping it's like their watercolors. It's not. So if you love the Schmincke Indigo watercolor and you want to try it in gouache because you think it's the same color, it's not the same color. Maybe you will like also the gouache version, but I didn't. Is Turquoise Green from Holbein, which is a lovely turquoise green. So that is here. It's a more recent addition to the palette. That's why you don't have a swatch here, because I did these swatches before I had the color. But let me show you my choice of teals. This is Winsor Newton Cobalt Turquoise Light. It is beautiful. This is Holbein, I think it's Cyprus Green. Very similar, maybe just a little bit deeper. And then this one is Holbein Pale Patina. I like them all. I use them all. I would probably say one of these two is redundant. This, I don't think it's like the easiest color to mix. So if you absolutely love this color, which I do, I love these shades of like mint, patina, then I would say, you know, grab this Holbein Pale Patina. But, you know, if you feel confident that you can mix something like this, then you don't need it. Future editing Irit interrupting the video, I wanted to say about the Pale Patina that you're likely to get a similar color if you have some sort of viridian or viridian hue, and then you add white to it. I just don't like viridian. I hardly ever use this kind of color as is. So for me personally, with my color sense, I prefer to have Pale Patina. because otherwise I would just have to keep on mixing a similar color. But yeah, if you like Viridian, then try adding white to it. You'll probably get something very, very similar to this. And these two are quite similar, and then this one is also similar. I just like options. I like to play with those very, very slight differences in shades in the color areas that I love. So for me, it works, but I definitely don't think that everyone needs to have all these colors. Let's move on to the greens. This is a touchy subject. This is where I feel really lacking here in gouache land. My one color that comes to the rescue is the Daniel Smith Cascade Green. They are coming out with a gouache olive green. I like in their watercolors, I like a bunch of their colors that they don't have in gouache, like the olive green deep, zoazite, and then a couple more like undersea green. Maybe they'll come out with that. But the wonderful thing about this is it still has that granulation and separations that the watercolors have, which I love that quality, and I want it also in gouache, and you don't really get it in gouache paint. This is Winsor & Newton Olive Green. It is a nice olive green. Again, I'm just missing that depth and granulation from watercolors, but this is the nature of the medium for the most part. Maybe Daniel Smith will change it. And then this color is more of let's have some versatility color. It's not a color I use a lot, but I do use it occasionally. This is by Holbein. It's called Seedling. It's just like this very bright spring May green type of color. And then my two earth tones that are quite similar, and probably I don't need both. This one is Winsor Newton Raw Sienna, and this one is Winsor Newton Gold Ochre. I do like to have an earth tone, but I don't need two. I wouldn't even know which one to choose. They're kind of similar to me. Yeah, I don't have strong emotions. I do have white in my palette, which is not shown here, but you want that. You see, that's the problem with this type of palette, that I know I'm going to add Moon Glow to my palette, and ideally I would want to add it here, and I won't be able to. Or maybe I will, because I can move this one maybe here. Or I'll add Moon Glow here. But it's problematic with these palettes if you want to change things around. I would say if there's a color you're not using, dump it. Maybe start with a small amount of paint in your palette and then add as you go. It's much easier to add like just one color when you run out than having to set up an entire palette every time you're painting. Unless you enjoy that or you paint with a very limited palette. So that is it. Very chatty video about paint and color, which is what I love. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any more questions, if you want to see more videos about gouache. I'm really enjoying them. I will see you soon in another video. Take care. Bye bye.